Welcome to Sew Very Easy. My name is Laura, and I have found a way to take these charm packs and turn 2 of the squares into a total of 8 half square triangles. Now there's some fancy sewing and some stitching lines that we need to draw, but out of 2 of these put together, we're going to be able to get 8 half square triangles. So since we're going to be able to do that, let's make a quilt and see how it turns out. To make the quilt, we're going to need 1 package of the charm squares, and there's 42 in a pack. And I'm going to need 1 yard of additional background fabric. And I did choose something that's going to have a high contrast. The bundle and that extra piece of fabric will make us a quilt 31.5 inches by 36.5 inches. And the first thing we're going to do is cut the largest pieces, which are the 5-inch squares. These charm packs advertise that they are 5 inches. However, they're usually a little bit more than 5 inches. The 5 inches is measured from the inside of those little pinked edges. So I have that zigzag, and it's from that inside to inside point. But I do want the squares that I'm going to cut in this background fabric at least this size, even just a tad bigger. So when I measure this, and I'm going to measure it from the outside edge, you can see it's a little bit of a generous 5 inches. So I'm going to cut background fabric to 5 1/4 of an inch. And those are the first things that I'm going to cut. It's always nice to just check and make sure that that is going to be big enough. And I just place that right on top of the ruler before I give that cut. So I have 14 of those squares cut. I'm going to need a total of 252 2-inch squares. And those are the only 2 sizes I'm going to need. To make our half square triangles, we're going to need 14 of the background and 14 of our charm squares. Match the fabric so the right sides are touching, and by having that a little bit bigger, it's just easy to center it. We're going to do 2 lines that are going to be stitching lines. We're going to go from corner to corner. We will need to stitch a 1/4 inch from each of these edges. Once we have that stitching done, we're going to cut it apart. And we're going to cut it 1, 2, and then right down the centers between that stitching line. So that now gives us 2, 4, 6, and 8 half square triangles. So we're going to be able to press those to the dark side and then trim them down to 2 inches. So there will not be a lot of trimming to do. We're going to turn these into a friendship star block. And we're going to be making 28 blocks. We're going to need 4 corners and a center. That dark part, or my background fabric, is going to face out. And that's going to give me my friendship star. As for myself, I am only going to do 2 of these blocks at a time. I do want to keep the same colors in each block, and that's just going to help me not have to mix those up by accident. This will now give me 2 5-inch blocks. I'm going to match those up with snowball blocks, and I need 28 of them. So I will need to trim these blocks to an exact 5-inch. I'm not going to need to trim a lot off, but I do need this to be 5 inches, so it will match this block. And to make that snowball block, I'm going to take our 2-inch squares, put them in the corner, and stitch from corner to corner. And I will need to do that to all 4 corners. When those little corners are stitched on and they're pressed back, we haven't changed the size of the square, we've just added some corners. So trim off a 1/4 inch and press. That friendship star and those snowball blocks are going to go together. And this is why it was important that we trimmed this down to 5 inch, because this was 5 inches. So the whole quilt is going to consist of these 2 blocks. So we started with that 1 yard of the background fabric and that really cute charm pack. The quilt will have 7 blocks in each row, and we are going to do a total of 8 rows. So in one row, we're going to have 4 of one block and 3 of the other, and then opposite in each row. So I would recommend to sew these together in rows of 7 and then put those rows together. With the quilt top put together, you can really just see this little spiral that is going around these snowball blocks. Now this is a beautiful quilt just on its own. We only needed 1 yard of fabric and that 1 bundle of pre-cuts. But if we're going to add a border, if you use a fabric that is the same or very similar to that background fabric, and in this case I did use a black, and I have something similar, it's going to make this so that these pieces are going to float in the middle of the quilt, which is a really nice look for this. You could add a white fabric and then that is going to stop the pattern. Right now this sort of blends together, but if I add a white border, it stops the pattern and you will notice more of that white print. So either one is going to work depending on what you are going to look for. I'm going to put this dark border on and I'm going to make a nice big 5-inch border. So for the sides, I am going to add on a cut piece of fabric 5 inches by 36.5 inches, and that will go to the long sides. Once those are done, I'm going to be able to put the top and the bottom on. They're both going to be cut at 5 inches, but we are going to need a 41-inch piece of fabric. Now the borders are optional, but it is a lot of fun. With that big border done, you can really see how that quilt is floating on top of that background fabric. And that's because the fabrics read the same. They really have that same feel to them. So you can always have the same fabric or something that is close. If you had the white background fabric, you would notice more of the light squares. This is a fun quilt to make. We were able to make 8 half-square triangles out of those 5-inch squares of fabric. This quilt now equals 40.5 inches by 45.5 inches, which will make a nice size crib quilt. I do hope you give it a try, and thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and I do have a newsletter. It's all free under Sew Very Easy. Thanks again for joining me. Bye for now.